On September 12, 2017, Hillary Clinton is slated to release the worst book in history on politics. Her book, What Happened, will explore why she lost to Donald Trump in the 2016 election. As Glenn Greenwald quipped on Twitter, this is the first time that the question and the answer of a book have been both conveniently placed on the cover, so you don't actually have to read the book. Predictably, as she's been doing since 2015 when she found out that she would not run unopposed in the primary, Hillary has been playing the victim card and blaming everyone but herself for her defeat at the hands of the most inept presidential candidate in history, Donald Trump. So her primary target is Bernie Sanders in this book. She's been attacking Sanders since the beginning, and she says that his campaign about her corruption and the problems with her stances was what really set up her defeat at the hands of Trump. That's the first thing I want to analyze, and we'll move forward and talk about the other reasons why she actually lost. In her book, Hillary lays down such compelling arguments as Bernie's not really a Democrat, and he was just trying to disrupt the party. She also says that his promises were unrealistic, and she more or less implies that he's a con man. She condescendingly refers to the things that he wanted to do as being unrealistic, while also basically saying that they more or less fundamentally agreed on everything and that he was just smearing her character. However, he never actually did smear her character. That's kind of a problem. She can't point to any instances where that happened. So her whole argumentation against Bernie doesn't really make a lot of sense, and she also doesn't understand why people liked Bernie, why Bernie gathered so much enthusiasm, whereas her campaign was not nearly as vigorously supported by the people who wanted her to be president. The reasons are pretty simple. One is that Bernie had a very clear message. He had policies that responded to the concerns of people in the Democratic Party and the nation as a whole. And two, Bernie had a clean reputation, and he was not someone who was tainted. So let's go and address those 2 points in greater depth. There's a very good and very simple reason why Hillary really struggled in the general election, and also why she was so cranky about having to specify her policies in the primary. She had no interest in running on policy, and she had no core message. When Donald Trump began tweeting and saying racist things at a record rate, she decided to run a campaign that basically said that Donald Trump is mean and a bad influence. That was as much substance as she wanted to get into. She did run on things, and yes, her platform included things like paid maternity leave and a few other things. However, there was no central or core unifying message. There was no real vision. She basically just wanted to continue Obama and tweak a couple things here and there and pass a couple of bills here and there, but there was no actual message or rhetorical unity to what she wanted to do. And that's a problem. You have to inspire people. You have to get people interested in what you want to do, and you have to have a message which resonates with a broad spectrum of people and unites them towards a common goal. Not just a hodgepodge of seemingly unrelated little things and then talking about your opponent being mean. Hillary makes the incredible claim that Bernie enabled Trump's Crooked Hillary campaign by attacking her Wall Street speeches and Wall Street contributions. However, that's a really stupid argument given that Trump has a tendency to attack everyone with names like Lying Ted and Little Marco, etc. So he was going to do that anyway, and he was running against the establishment from the beginning. He didn't really need Bernie's help in that regard, and he didn't attack her on the same grounds that Bernie did. Trump ran as a Republican. He has no problem with her taking money from Wall Street. He's cool with that, and he tried to do the same himself. So, no. The reason I put a picture of Larry Craig on the screen is because he's someone who was a family values conservative, and then he was caught trying to solicit a man to have sex with him in an airport bathroom, which is the scandal that ultimately ended his run in the Senate. So even after getting caught trying to do this in the bathroom, he still went out and gave speeches about the immorality of homosexuality on the floor of the Senate, and no one told him to sit down and shut up. This is what's going on with Hillary, talking about how she shouldn't be attacked for corruption when she does have a history of corruption. Now, her corruption during her career is not as bad as what Trump's has been so far and what it promises to be going forward. However, it still is not a good track record. Her positions on various issues, especially healthcare, have been heavily affected by donations that she's received in the past from big donors. She's also received a lot of donations from the private prison industry and various defense contractors. That's not good. That's not what you want out of a progressive if you are a Democratic voter in a primary, or an independent who wants to see the country take a different direction and pursue a different foreign policy which involves less unnecessary wars. So, yeah, she's got about as much credibility talking about corruption as Larry Craig does talking about sexual morality. Hillary has been rightly taken to task for her use of identity politics, which is a perversion of how this is supposed to be used. In the 2008 primary, she said that Obama shouldn't get the nomination because he was losing among white voters, and that she did better among whites, therefore the Democrats should back her if they wanted to win. Then in the 2016 primary, she pointed out that she was winning more black votes than Bernie, and that a vote for Bernie was a vote for white privilege and would effectively disenfranchise black people. That is a bad perversion of identity politics. What identity politics is supposed to do is to rally different groups behind a party or a leader based on policy outcomes. So, for instance, if you wanted to rally black voters to your cause in the 1960s, you could push for the civil rights movement, which is what the Democrats did. That is a way to have a tangible goal for a group of people that you want to win over, which helps them. And it also, by having a tangible goal, you can win over people who are outside of that group if they're empathetic to that group. So quite a few white people were supportive of the civil rights movement because they understood what the goals were. The goals were material. There was a desired outcome, and there was a reason for the Democratic Party to court black voters and to advance their interest. Everybody could agree upon an objective. Whereas the identity politics of Hillary Clinton are solely about, we support black people and Hispanics, but we don't really have a set policy objective. We just kind of support them in a vague, nebulous way. So if you're a working class white voter somewhere, you don't see the Democratic Party arguing in favor of you in some nebulous, meaningless way, but you do see the Republicans doing that. This is the way Republicans use identity politics. They always campaign on things like the flag and pride and feelings and morality and other completely immaterial things. Democrats win when they campaign on substance and policy. So, for instance, if part of your identity politics was to be, hey, we would like to help dreamers with a specific bill, that would actually win votes. If you're a Republican and you say, fuck Mexicans, that works with your base because that's the way that you always campaign. You don't actually want to pass laws. Democrats are motivated differently than Republicans, and a lot of independents are motivated in various other ways, but normally one thing that they look for is when you have a message and you also have a purpose. And there's a correct way to practice identity politics when it's wed to a policy outcome, and a stupid and ineffective way, which is what Hillary Clinton did by talking about respect and other intangibles. One major problem with a lot of prominent Democrats, including and especially Hillary Clinton, her immediate supporters like Robby Mook, is that they basically openly embrace this idea of being liberal elitist. Now, while Hillary would never quite call herself that in so many words, she is very contemptuous of many of the people who voted for her opponent. And she's also contemptuous of many people who voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary. They have a tendency to not really respect the people who disagree with them and to misrepresent their motives. Now, again, this is something that Republicans have done for many years, and it's one of the things that's really held back the Republicans. However, if you're a Democrat and you're trying to tell people that you're there to help them, and then you call them stupid morons and put them down, mock their culture, that really doesn't make them want to get in bed with you and back your ideas and your candidacy. If you're a politician, you can't embrace elitism. You always have to have some sort of accessibility and relatability. Now, not all people are going to be natural populists, but still, you can't disparage portions of the American public if you're a Democrat. Trump, in so doing, set himself up to be very vulnerable. However, instead of just simply taking the high road and not retaliating by attacking Trump voters as deplorables, Hillary decided, and especially her supporters, who she did not do a good job of reining in. She always complains about Bernie and others not reining in their supporters properly. Here's a case where she didn't do it. She allowed her supporters to just go around and condescend to everyone else about how great she is and how terrible everybody else is. And all that does is then Trump voters who might sort of think at a certain point, well, Trump is not being a very respectful person and I don't want that in a president. Now they're thinking, well, this is a purely partisan thing. We all hate each other and we all look down on each other, so I might as well side with the side that's kissing my ass. So I'm just going to go vote for Trump. He's no worse than she is. She's every bit as petty as he is. And maybe he'll be different. Maybe he'll shake things up. Who knows? Nobody knows what Trump will do. So I think that she lost quite a few votes by doing that, by embracing liberal elitism and allowing her supporters to market her that way on Facebook and other social media platforms. Not to mention her media allies, who really should have known better, since they are ostensibly the intellectual elite who should study political trends and political science. And yet they know nothing about any of that stuff. I don't know for certain whether or not Hillary will bring up the Electoral College screwing her over, but I kind of suspect she will, just given her general attitude of blaming everyone and everything other than herself. And even if she doesn't bring it up, it's something her supporters do bring up quite a bit, so I'm going to go ahead and address it. And the reason I'm not going to read her book is not because I'm lazy, I'm certainly not, but because I'm not paying money to Hillary Clinton to hear her bash Bernie and lie her ass off while trying to set herself up for another losing effort in 2020. So, the Electoral College is a fact of life. It's an antiquated, elitist, and ridiculous institution, but it's something that has been with us for a very long time and has screwed us more than once at this point. If you are running for president, you need to be aware of this, and you and your chief strategist, Robby Mook, should have found a way to win the right votes in the right places in order to bring this thing home. After all, in the primaries, one of your main arguments against Bernie is that you're more electable, and that Bernie might be a feel-good candidate, but he can't win, whereas you are basically a sure thing. Ha ha ha! Well, I guess you didn't bother to point out that you were going to run the most inept campaign in all of our lifetimes. So the thing is, Robby Mook apparently does not understand the Electoral College. He was looking at national numbers, and he probably correctly predicted that Hillary would win the popular vote, and he thought because of that, the thing was in the bag. He didn't realize that you have to actually win votes in certain places in order to win electoral votes to actually become president. Robby Mook is an advanced analytics guy, and he's not nearly as smart as he thinks he is. There's also evidence in the book Shattered that the Clinton campaign didn't open a ground game in Florida in earnest until October, which is unbelievably stupid. But you want to know what's even more unbelievably stupid, that to the point that it almost made me have an aneurysm when I found out about it. Here it is. As a lifelong progressive and as a Bernie Sanders supporter during the 2016 cycle, it pains me to say this, but even if Hillary had kept all of her platform the same and all of her rhetoric the same on a national level, had she run a decent campaign from a purely political science standpoint, she most likely would have still managed to win the election. And what do I mean by that? Well, she basically lost by 77,000 votes in 3 states. she needed to win Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in order to win, and she came very close in all of them, especially Wisconsin, which I believe was only about 7,000 votes or something. The thing is, Wisconsin was a state that she didn't campaign in at all. Hillary Clinton never appeared in Wisconsin. She could have made pretty quick stops there in, say, Milwaukee and Madison, where you've got a large concentration of Democrats. And she could have said, state unions are good, and I support American jobs, the end. And then she would have won just enough votes to win the 10 electoral votes in Wisconsin. But she didn't do that. And when she found out that Wisconsin was going to be a problem spot, Robby Mook convinced her to not campaign there, because otherwise then Trump would know that she's vulnerable there, and he might campaign harder and increase his chances of winning. Now that's the stupidest strategy I've ever heard. Michigan. Apparently, as things got worse there, or as she thought she was going to win, she withdrew her campaign staff. And Robby Mook was notoriously cheap as a campaign manager. However, Hillary outraised Trump by 2-1 during the campaign. So it wasn't that they were strapped for cash. They had lots of cash coming in, and they could have kept that state campaign office running. In terms of Pennsylvania, I actually don't know exactly what happened, but Pennsylvania is a pretty difficult state, usually leans Democrat, and I think in Pennsylvania the thing that really killed her was that lack of economic message. However, what if she had had a good ground game in Florida or North Carolina, or some of the other states that she lost? She might have still managed to pull it out. So again, a lot of what fucked her over was her own, and her and Robby Mook, their lack of basic political science knowledge and execution. A lot of this stuff is not difficult. This is stuff that someone who minored in political science could figure out without any problem. But apparently this was too hard for Hillary Clinton and Robby Mook, the political geniuses who are now trying to paint a new version of events whereby they are not liable for the fact that they lost horribly to a completely unqualified and unhinged candidate. One way that candidates strengthen themselves is when they choose a vice presidential running mate. Now, Trump tried his best to get the best available candidate on his ticket. He wanted to get John Kasich because Kasich is from Ohio, and Ohio is seen as a must-win. However, Kasich wasn't interested, so he ended up going with Mike Pence, who was the best he could get. Pence was someone who at least had some degree of credibility with the mainstream Republican base, and he actually had held a public office. So at least he didn't try to get Hulk Hogan on the ticket and just run an all-celebrity bullshit campaign. He did the best he could under the circumstances, shockingly. Hillary Clinton decided to shore up a non-weakness by choosing Tim Kaine. Now, again, this goes back to her obsession with a substance-free identity politics. She thought that her weakness would be of white males. So she decided to go with a white male. Because when white dudes would see Tim Kaine on TV, they would know that they're part of the identity group that Hillary Clinton fights for in a vague, meaningless way. And then they would go vote for the Democrats, except that the Democrats got butchered in the white male demographic, as they often do, but by worse than usual. So the tokenism of choosing Tim Kaine did not pan out. What else did he bring to the table? Well, he's actually to Hillary Clinton's right on both social and economic issues. So, in theory, Democrats a lot of times believe that will bring in independence. The thing is, independents are not clearly ideological. Most American voters, they might have an idea of where they are on the left-right scale, and they might have a vague idea where politicians are on that scale, but they don't do a sophisticated political analysis to pinpoint someone's position on the scale. So trying to appeal to independents you might think are centrist just by virtue of the fact that they're not in either party is not going to work. You have to think a little bit more in terms of how do I get out my own base, one, or how do I find a candidate who shores up some of my personal weaknesses and brings some sort of charm or experience or something else to the table. Obama had all the charm, but he needed some experience and a more familiar, comforting face, so he went with Joe Biden, who has one thing Obama doesn't have as well, foreign policy experience. So that was a good choice. Hillary had a problem with her progressive base going into this election because almost all of us felt like she rigged the Democratic primary against Bernie Sanders. After all, the rules have been rewritten since 2008 to exclude independents, and there was a lot of shady things that went down with Debbie Wasserman Schultz. That's a pretty well documented thing. It's not a fringe belief. So lots of progressives were pretty pissed, but they're still horrified about Trump. So all they need is some sort of reconciliatory offer from Hillary Clinton. Choose someone to her left, someone who's a reliable progressive, someone who's younger, who makes up for the health concerns people had about her, someone who's more charismatic, more likable, someone who can be a future candidate and a viable future candidate that will ensure that the Democrats start building a bench so they can keep competing. So choose, what's the senator from Oregon? I'm blanking on his name. Jeff Merkley. You could choose him. He's like a random guy. He would be a white guy, but he'd also be someone who's reasonably experienced and has a good track record, has state-level experience and not just national, and he's someone who is a pretty reliable progressive. You could have gone with a lot of different people who would have helped shore up Hillary Clinton's weaknesses, people who seem a lot less corporate, people who are younger and healthier, people who have a future, people who appeal to the left, people who might appeal to independents because they have a more outsider appeal. She could have gotten someone with almost no experience, someone who was a rising star, or had the potential to be a rising star, like one of the Castro brothers from Texas. But instead she chose Tim Kaine, the guy who should be in the X-Lax commercial, the guy who should be on the Sleep Aid commercial, the most boring man to ever live, someone with the charisma of bark, someone who makes Hillary Clinton seem like a captivating speaker. Yeah, that's what she did. She chose Tim Kaine. Hillary also had a problem with likability. Now, she tried to say that everyone who didn't like her or said that she was a bad speaker or had an annoying voice was just a sexist. Well, that's not a very good argument. So what kind of stuff did she do to try to make herself seem interesting? Well, she told us that she likes to carry around hot sauce in her purse, and then she and her campaign chair, John Podesta, went around and told everyone that they want to reveal the truth about UFOs and request information from the government. This is something which was also done by Dennis Kucinich, who, as you know, is an extremely successful politician who won the 2008 Democratic nomination and went on to serve 2 terms as president. One thing that Hillary did which really hurt her likability to a great extent was acting like she had the nomination shored up before the first debate was ever held and treating all of her opponents like mere children. Now, I'll grant you, Jim Webb and Lincoln Chafee are not exactly the most impressive candidates, and they had no chance of winning. However, it's just like when you have to respect your voters. You have to treat everyone as if they matter in some way and as if they're legitimate contenders. And you have to make voters think that you are striving for their vote and competing for their vote, and that you're worried about winning their vote and their approval. Hillary showed no concern for the opinions of voters, and whenever Sanders would win something, she would kind of just brush it off and try to paint him as a fringe long shot candidate and just kind of ignore what he had done. So she wasn't really looking for a challenge, and that made her look like an entitled prick. The same way that Trump is an entitled prick. Had she come off as a normal candidate who was looking to redeem herself from her 2008 defeat, and she had a, say, message about why she wants to be president and all the great things she'll do as president, then she could have run as a regular candidate who has a reason to be there, and she might have appealed more to independent voters in swing states during the general election. But of course, I'm assuming that Hillary Clinton is actually capable of running a semi-competent campaign or messaging like a human being. And obviously, that's just a fantasy. In conclusion, I want you all to remember that anyone who is writing about their own personal experience and has a lot of bitterness towards everyone who denied them their lifelong dream is going to have an extremely strong bias and is not going to be able to see things in any kind of way which is remotely clear. And I think that Hillary writing a book about her electoral defeat in this way is the ultimate example of that. There's probably not going to be anything of merit in this entire book unless you're talking about Hillary Clinton's hubris and psychological profile. This is a pathetic attempt to exonerate herself for all of the horrible failures that we're going to have to live through under the Trump administration. And I didn't want to make this video on this channel. However, the fact that this book is coming out bothers me on so many levels, and I felt that it was so profoundly wrong that I had to use the little platform that I've built up to talk about it. So I know a lot of you probably did not tune in for this content when you subscribed to the channel, but you know, forgive me, you don't have to watch the video, I guess. Anyway, until next time, I'm Thersites the Historian, and I'll see you around probably talking about something from the Middle Ages.